Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today, I'm talking about some under the radar classic 90s albums. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So I think the 90s overall is the most musically diverse decade we've ever had. You know, yes, there's some great rock music that was released that over those years, but some great country music, there's some great R&B, there's some great rap. So many different genres, I think, really had some huge albums that came out that decade. And you compare that to, say, the 70s, which I think the 70s were the heyday of rock music. There wasn't a whole lot that it had to compete with like there was in the 90s. And I think that's why a lot of these albums kind of slid under the radar. Maybe not so much at the time. You know, in the years that they were released, they were big-ish albums. But I think looking back, you know, several years later or several decades later now, I don't think they're remembered nearly as fondly as some of the other albums that these bands released over that decade. And yes, if you've been a fan of these bands for years and years, they're not under the radar to you, but I think they are to a vast majority of people out there. And like I always say, music is very subjective. This is just my opinion. That's what makes these kind of conversations interesting to me, is I like to know what you guys think. So make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think are some of the biggest, most underrated albums of the 90s. The first album I have is, I think, overshadowed by the band's first two albums, and that's Happy Pills by Candlebox. Of course, their self-titled debut and Lucy, which was their second album, were both really big. And when Happy Pills was released, I think it's definitely more experimental than their first two albums. It was met with a lot of really mixed reviews. When this came out in 1998. I don't think I listened to it maybe once or twice after it was released. And then I didn't revisit it until, you know, within the last several years. When I don't remember what year this reissue came out, but this is the Music on Vinyl reissue. And that was the first time I listened to it in a very long time, and I was really impressed the overall quality of this album. And while it might not have, you know, the same huge hits that their self-titled album had, you know, I think overall, beginning to end, I think this is up there. I put this up there with their self-titled debut as the best that the band ever did. And then an album that was released just the year before Happy Pills is Greased by Less Than Jake. Of course, Less Than Jake is known for being a ska punk band, but there's very little ska on this album. This was released between Losing Streak and Hello Rockview, which I think are two of the best ska punk albums of the 90s. And these are just their takes on these classic songs from the great musical. That's something a lot of us grew up with, you know, watching the movie. So we know all these songs on here. So it's definitely a fun, energetic take on a lot of those classics. That's also something I'd love to see Less Than Jake reissue. I know they just announced the reissue of Pezcore, which is something I don't think has been reissued since the 90s. So I think they could do something really cool with Greased. Yes, it's only like 18 or 19 minutes long, so it's technically an EP and not an album, but you know, it's one that I know a lot of people are looking for, and it's one that I think has really kind of flown under the radar. And there's probably a lot of people out there that know who Less Than Jake are, have listened to a couple of their albums, and probably don't even know about this. So by the time the end of the 90s rolled around, music had really changed. Even like compared to the middle part of the 90s, you know, by 1999, music was in a very different place overall. And that's when Mike Ness released the masterpiece, Cheating at Solitaire. I was really surprised this album did not blow up when it was released in 1999. This is an album I put up there, probably one of my top 10 albums of the decade. Of course, Mike Ness is known as the frontman for Social Distortion, but this is very different than anything else he did with the band. This is more, there's some country on here, there's some folk on here, there's some blues, there's also some rock on here. You know, Brian Setzer's on this album. There's a great cover of Don't Think Twice by Bob Dylan on here. This is an album that I listen to pretty regularly. I think it's an album that, had it been released a year or two earlier, would have been even bigger. You know, commercially it did okay. Hit number 80, I think, on the Billboard 200. You know, but 1999, you know, a lot of fans were kind of turning away from rock, looking at other things. Rap was really blowing up. You know, boy bands were huge also. So I think at least the mainstream focus was in a different direction than what was going on this album. And, you know, it's one that, you know, I would still put up there, like I said, as one of the best albums of the decade. So in 1998, Cake released their follow-up to Fashion Nugget with Prolonging the Magic. And yes, this album doesn't have The Distance on here. It doesn't have I Will Survive. It doesn't have, you know, those huge hits I think really pushed Fashion Nugget up the charts, but I think beginning and end, this is a much more focused album than what they've done previously. That's why I think I have to give Prolonging the Magic a little bit of an edge over Fashion Nugget. Even though, like I said, doesn't have those big hits, didn't do as well commercially. I think Fashion Nugget kind of overshadowed really a lot of stuff that Cake did in their career. People really know the band for that one album, and I think they're missing out on a lot of really good stuff. Even after Prolonging the Magic, they released some other great albums that I think were equally as great as anything else they did in their career. I think the next album is probably more forgotten than Under the Radar, and that's Lemon Parade by Tonic. This is an album that's known for If You Could Only See, and I know a lot of people look at Tonic as a one-hit wonder band, but if you go back through and listen to this album, there's not a bad track on here. If You Could Only See is probably one of my least favorite songs on this album. And it's just one that I don't think the band ever quite did anything like this in their career. I know they did release an acoustic version of this album, which is really good. A lot of the songs that are on this album, I think, work even better as acoustic tracks. But as far as late 90s albums go, I think this is one of the best post-grunge albums. I was glad to see Music on Vinyl do a re-release of it within the last couple of years, because to be completely honest, until I saw it on the release list, I'd completely forgot this album even existed. Then the last album I've got is one that I would easily put this up as one of the top 20 albums of the 90s, and I don't think it nearly gets the love that it deserves. It's an album that came out back in 1995, and it's grown into this cult classic kind of an album, but it's You Prefer an Astronaut by Hum. So this is technically, I guess, a shoegaze album, but I think it's more than that. It's heavier than a lot of shoegaze. It's dark, it's atmospheric at times, it's a really good listen, and it's one that, of course, everyone knows the one track off here. If you mention Hum to people, they're like, oh yeah, it's the band that had Stars. I remember that on the radio back in the 90s. But, same thing with a lot of the other albums I talked about today. The biggest track, or the track it's known for, is not even close to being the best track on the album. And this is also an album that was hugely influential to me. So in 1995, I turned 16 that year. The band I was in at the time, we had a couple of songs that sounded very similar to a couple of tracks off this album, and it really helped shape my musical interests or my playing style there for a good couple of years, and it's all because of this album. And this is one that if you're unfamiliar with Hum, it's worth a listen. At least go online and stream it. This is a 10 out of 10 album for me, and I would definitely put this up there with all the other great albums that were released in the 90s. Like I've always said, I think music is the most subjective form of art we have. So, of course, this is just my opinion. Drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think are some of the most under-the-radar albums of the 90s. Because there's a whole lot more. Actually, I think I had like 15 or 16 albums that I had to kind of narrow my list down from. So there's definitely more options out there. But let me know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.